Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming. I appreciate you all, whether you're watching us on YouTube, on Rumble, and on X. Yesterday, an hour after our live conversation with Sayed Mohammed Marandi and Vanessa Billy, Iran has retaliated on Israel. They have sent over 200 ballistic missiles or cruise missiles. I'm not an expert in these military affairs, but those were long range missiles. And the footage that I have seen, many of these missiles have hit some of the targets in Israel. Now, Israel says this was a failure. The mainstream media says it was a failure from the Iran side, and Israel vows to retaliate. And today we have some intelligence information that Israel is going to retaliate against Iran. And Iran says if there is a retaliation or a response, they will going to respond even harsher against Israel. Today we are going to discuss all these developing issues. Those are very dangerous, and apparently we're headed to some sort of a regional war with none other than retired Colonel Jacques Baud. He is a former NATO advisor and ex-member of the Swiss Strategic Intelligence. I'm very pleased to have you on the channel. Your insight is very important during this time. Thank you so much for coming to the show.
Thank you for inviting me on your show. Thanks.
It's really my pleasure. I've been trying to have you on the show, and this is a perfect time, in my opinion, to speak about this objectively and to understand what happened yesterday, because it's all sensational. If you're on social media, some people are celebrating, some people playing victim. We want to find the truth. What happened yesterday? So I would like to start with you step by step. For example, the nature of the attack. Iran sent hundreds, over 200 long-range missiles. What type of missiles Iran used to begin with against Israel? Were there any hypersonic missiles, or were these all ballistic missiles? Can you please explain to us the type of the weapons?
Well, apparently, we don't know exactly the details, but apparently there were a mix of several types of missiles. Missile Qadr 1 and apparently 2, and EMAD missile, which are I would say 10 years old generation, something like that, roughly. And there were also a small number of hypersonic missiles from the Fatah 1 and Fatah 2 type, which are quite recent and which can, as their name says, they can travel at hypersonic velocity, meaning that it's something like probably around 11,000 kilometers per hour. Now, we don't know exactly how the attack was structured, but it seems that we have a pattern which is very close to the one we have seen in April this year. You remember that Iran replied to the attack of the Iranian consulate in Damascus, and they attacked with a mix of drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles. Some suggested that there were some hypersonic missiles, but we don't know for sure. The thing is that the nature of these kind of attacks is to use older generation, I would say, aircraft or missiles as decoy, if you want, to force Israel to use their anti-aircraft and air defense assets to destroy those missiles. And once the air defense missiles are depleted or saturated, then the right missile, if I can use that expression, the right missile can come and hit the targets. In April, Iran had 3 main targets. Apparently, this time they had 4 military targets. It was the military air base of Tel Naf in the vicinity of Tel Aviv, the air base of Hetzarim and Nettavim, which are in fact in the southern part of Israel, not far away from the Gaza Strip, where the aircraft, the type F-35 and F-15A are based. And apparently that was an attempt, at least. I don't know whether they managed to reach these or to hit those aircraft, but apparently it was an objective. According to some reports, some 20 F-35 were hit on the ground. I am a little bit doubtful about this. I'm not sure at all, but let's say that's what was reported. And there was another target, which apparently was the Mossad headquarters in the north of Tel Aviv, and apparently at least one missile hit at least the compound in which the
Mhm.
headquarters is. There were some reports that the headquarters was destroyed, but here again, I'm a little bit cautious about this. But at least the compound seems to have been hit. But the interesting thing for those two attacks, because those two attacks are in fact very similar in substance. The idea was not, as we can see, not to destroy Israel, not to hit severely Israel,
Mhm.
but it was more like a show of force, if you want. The name of the game for Iran is, I would even call that deterrence in some sense. The idea is to strike Israel with the idea that if you want to hit harder, we also have the ability to hit harder. We, on both occasions, Iran avoided any civilian objective, which is quite interesting because we see that Israel never tries to avoid
Mhm.
civilians. And the Iranians managed to reach their military objective without, with minimal loss of lives, if you want. And the purpose of that is, first of all, to show that it's possible to hit without hitting civilian infrastructure. That's one thing. But the other thing is that for Iran, it opens the door for a possible escalation. If you want to have a gradual escalation, Iran has this option. And we see that since April, we were waiting for a reaction of Israel of Iran after the killing of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. We have seen that on as it was the case in April, Iran was very cautious in launching its operation. It obviously Iran doesn't want to act like a hip shooter. You know,
Mhm.
the idea is to have a careful, planned, well discussed, both internally and externally, to discuss this issue. Because the problem of Iran is that the U.S., I mean, Israel, obviously in the first place, but also the U.S. are waiting for any opportunity to hit Iran very hard. And therefore, it's important, and that was the case in April, that Iran, through Oman, managed to do at least two things. First of all, to explain the US that the response will not be an all out war against Israel. And secondly, they managed to get some kind of guarantee that the US will not engage into this issue. I mean,
Mhm.
to attack Iran. And probably that's the same that happened this time, because Iran doesn't want to launch a regional war, doesn't want to have its action to be misinterpreted, because that the misinterpretation could be, in fact, the trigger of something dramatic. And Iran just wanted to say, we have the capability of responding. We
Mhm.
have this capability. We can do more. We can do better. We have better weapons. We are not shooting everything. We still have something in reserve, but we just show you what we are able to do. And I think that's, in fact, what can explain, or how we can explain this operation. That's also
Mm.
explain why it came so late. And that's also something that we need to discuss, because
Yes.
in the last couple of weeks we had a lot of speculation about the why Iran didn't want to respond, and also we had speculation about the relationship between Iran and Hezbollah, because especially
Yes.
after the killing of Hassan Nasrallah, there was an expectation, apparently, at least as it was portrayed in our media, it was an expectation from Hezbollah that Iran would react very strongly against Israel. My view is that the margin, or the freedom of movement, or the freedom of reaction of Iran is extremely narrow, and for that reason, Iran has said it would respond to the assassination of Haniyeh. The assassination of Hassan Nasrallah probably reinforced the intent to respond, but at the same time, they wanted to respond at the right time, with the force or the weapons they wanted to. They didn't want to be forced into a response. They wanted to choose the moment, and to choose not just let's say the good time during the day, but also in terms of diplomatic relationship. Remember, we had the UN General Assembly. President Pezeshkian went to the General Assembly. He showed a quite openness in discussion with the West. And I think for Iran, it was important to have this step before reacting, in order to show that they don't want to be, let's say, limited to the use of force, but that they are also considering diplomatic solution, and basically a foreign policy based type of response, if you want, and not just simply military response. The
Mm.
thing is that we had, during the last week, or during the General Assembly, we had the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, and second, apparently, let's say, this kind of um, open hands or open arms of Pezeshkian was not received with the attention it deserved by Western countries.
Mm.
And that's probably what prompted this reaction, or this military response from Iran. That's how I see it.
Before I ask you a follow-up question, I just want to make a remark that the first three questions that I had in my mind, you answered them in order, like you're in my head, and you know what kind of questions I'm going to ask you, and you answered them in orderly. Actually, this is where I'm going to pick this point, because the president of Iran was very open and to the West, and he sent signals, both verbal and also during his meetings in the UN. And this has, by the way, for those who follow the press of the what they call the axis of resistance, the allies of Iran, they were very upset, because this came at a very important time when Israel is waging a brutal campaign in the Gaza Strip, and they are intending to wage a military ground invasion in Lebanon. So everybody started to say, look, the president of Iran is going to sell his allies in the region. This has really I don't want to say completely destroyed, but people's morale were very, very low. Because of what Iran's president said especially during the CNN interview. And now that I follow the same press and the same, let's say, public relation outlets, etc., in the region, the morale is very high because they expected for Iran to play this leading role. Now, we always say that Iran doesn't want a regional war, but at the same time, we also I hear from retired military generals that I watch. I'm not speaking about you, but others. They say the United States also doesn't want a regional war, and it's Israel who is provoking this war. But in my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, every time the US has set a new red line verbally, Israel has broken this red line, and the United States has they walked with Israel in the same direction, like going to Rafah is a red line, and they have crossed the red line. They don't want for Israel to go to Lebanon, and now it's in Lebanon. And they didn't want for Israel to bomb Iran as well, and they bombed Iran multiple times, and they are doing similarly now in Syria. So the question here is, can we really separate the foreign policy and the security, let's say, policies of Israel and the United States, or it is Israel who is leading this policy in the region?
Well, the different aspects of this, the question and and the answer, of course. First of all, what you say that the U.S. is setting red lines and Netanyahu is crossing those red lines. You have exactly the same thing in Ukraine, by the way. Is that all the red lines, except the last one about the use of weapons in the depth of Russian territory, but all the other red lines were in fact Western red lines. And in fact, Ukraine crossed those red lines and the West stepped in. So we have the same situation. And I will answer the question more directly before, but I think this aspect, this very aspect that the allies of the West, generally speaking, that apply to Ukraine and to Israel, that they are simply making the decision without regards of what the West is saying, is to some extent rather worrying, because when you talk about both cases, by the way, Ukraine and Israel, you notice that when we start talking about talks, negotiation, or dialogue, nobody looks at the EU or Europe. Nobody looks at Germany or France, which used to be those countries who promoted dialogue and talks and all that. Today, these countries are just out of the discussion. When you start talking about dialogue, everybody looks at the US. Whether or not we like the US, it seems that's the only power that we are looking at when it comes to arrange a dialogue or discussion between parties. And what is very worrying is that we see that the influence of the US is reducing. You see that more and more you have Netanyahu doing whatever he wants, and the same as Zelensky. I mean, the attack to Kursk, for instance, apparently the US was not informed and was even against this attack on the Kursk Oblast in Russia. And that was the same about the killing of Ismail Haniyeh. And apparently it was the same for the killing of Hassan Nasrallah. Meaning that we see that Israel and Ukraine both are very keen to ask for help, support, money, weapons, and ammunition. But when it comes to try to have a consistent approach to a specific problem or specific question, or to address red lines, they don't care. They do whatever they want. And that shows that these conflicts are, in my view, very dangerous, because they're very close to be out of control. Because whether or not we like or love the US, they are to some extent, and given the situation we have, since there is no alternative, the US, especially today, they are some kind of stabilizing power, or they could be. especially because we are in the presidential year. When we talk about Iran, it's no mystery that a lot of politicians, and that's bipartisan in the US, would be very keen to attack, bomb, or destroy Iran. And that has been said several times. I mean, Lindsey Graham and others. I don't want to cite all of them, but
The list is
we
very long.
know the list is extremely long, exactly, and probably even Joe Biden and Blinken and so on. So we know that this willingness is there. The problem is that, especially in this year, because of the presidential year, but also because of the changing balance of power in the world and the growing importance of regional actors such as the BRICS, for instance, and things like this. The US tries to avoid further destabilization, and therefore, even though they feed the conflicts by providing weapons, political support, and lip service to Netanyahu and so on, at the same time, they are the only ones who try to promote negotiated. I'm not sure they are doing that with a lot of let's say, conviction. Probably not so convinced, but they are doing it at least. Otherwise, nobody would do it. And that's very true in this election year. I think now, remember when we talk about the situation of Iran and the response we have just discussed before, we are just 1 month away from the presidential election, meaning that it's probably for the US not the best time to have a war, even limited war, involving Iran. And so that's a reason why the US is keen trying to smooth a little bit the angles in the region. The problem is that Netanyahu is not at the same page, and what worries me is that Netanyahu is an irrational actor, or at least he has a rationale, but not exactly the same as we could expect from a normal Western and a country that abides by the rule of law. The foreign policy and the national security of Israel, since the beginning, has always relied on disproportionate response to everything. And when I say response, I am even generous, because most of the time it's not even a response, it's disproportionate attack on its neighbors. They tried to impose themselves by being feared by their neighbors, instead of finding let's say, a way for dialogue. As a result, it's Israel is a country which is very unpredictable, especially when it comes to trying to apply, let's say, Western standards in terms of foreign policy, if there are any. And he is the guy who could trigger a war without any afterthoughts.
Yes.
And that's a little bit the problem. It's interesting that in the last couple of months, for instance, everybody was asking Iran for restraint, but nobody asked Israel for restraint.
Yeah, that's
because
it. That's the real question, because now that after Iran retaliated and all the condemnation, of course, from the collective West against Iran, we have a report today by Mohammad Marandi saying that it seems that the Zionist regime is preparing for another escalation. This time, Iran's response will be much more devastating. Iran will beat the regime into submission. I mean, if we leave aside the sensation, but if Israel Israel retaliates now again, Iran will respond again. And this is the snowball that it
Exactly.
started in different geography, but now I don't see there is a way out of this regional war. It becomes like inevitable for everyone to understand the balance of power in the region and for a certain security architecture to be built in the region. Otherwise, this is going to be a killing machine by Israel in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, and in elsewhere. And nobody is trying to hold back Netanyahu from this because, first, in my opinion, there is no willingness in the West or they are unable to do it. And secondly, we have very strong sentiments among the new coalition, let's say, or the Israeli coalition among the very radical right wing politicians who are in charge nowadays and talking about Armageddon scenarios in the region. So, from my perspective, which I don't wish for it to happen, I don't see that this is going to be over anytime soon. This is going to be a long struggle until there is a direct clash. And whether the United States wants it or not, if Israel clashes with Iran directly, they will intervene. Israel
Absolutely.
is not only an ally, it's instrumental for them in the region, right?
You're absolutely right, and I think that's the danger. I think what you have also something you have to take into the equation that, as you said, we are in a kind of snowball effect, and we have the problem of escalatory responses on both sides, and but the problem is that the stakes for the US increase also at every steps, because right now the US is not very keen to have, I mean, certainly what you said is absolutely right. If Israel gets attacked, and by the way, apparently during that missile attack, US was involved in providing support through missiles fired by naval the naval force that is in the
Yes.
Mediterranean. So apparently they came to help Israel, and they will certainly continue to do so. The problem is up to which point, and this is a little bit the problem for the US, because they consider Israel as an ally for several reasons, probably mostly for domestic reasons, by the way.
Mm.
But it's an important aspect for them, so they will come to support Israel. The problem is up to which point. What I've heard, despite the fact that US have dispatched a small contingent of Marines or elite force in the region, I'm not sure the US are very keen to repeat the experience they had in Iraq or Afghanistan or something like that. They will certainly support with air support, for instance, with aircraft, missiles, and these kind of things. I'm not sure they are willing to come with boots on the ground. I mean, effective boots on the ground. Again, I don't know. I'm not in the planning circles of the Pentagon, but my feeling is that they will try to avoid this at every cost, especially now. But the fact of the matter is, as you said, that if Israel does something crazy, the US will have to take part of it to some extent, and they know that. And
Yes.
but you have also to take something into consideration. I was in NATO, as you said. I have been 5 years in NATO. As a result of because you know that I'm Swiss, and the Swiss doesn't belong to NATO, but my government had a special agreement with NATO. So, but I was 5 years in NATO, and I noticed with my contacts with my peers, my US, and especially US peers, not many of them were keen to support Israel. That's very interesting.
Mm.
At political level, there is no doubt that they are claiming at least that they would support Israel. But when you talk to military people, they are much less enthusiastic as the politicians, meaning that, in my view, if the president decides to involve the U.S. armed forces in the Middle East, that will be probably through Air Force and missile and air defense and this kind of things, rather than boots on the ground. That's my
Mm.
personal view. I might be wrong, but that's my experience, let's say.
I agree with you on this, Colonel. As you mentioned, Air Force and ground force, we know that Israel is trying to wage a ground invasion of Lebanon now, and they have attempted multiple times in the past 2 days, and they lost 14 soldiers so far against Hezbollah in some of the areas on the contact line, let's say between Hezbollah and Lebanon. Now the geography in Lebanon it's completely different than in Gaza. So taking into consideration this geography, and second is Hezbollah's efficacy in guerrilla warfare and Israel's aerial superiority. How do we assess this type of conflict when one side is capable of destroying the infrastructure buildings with an air force and the other side is more capable of fighting underground head at head? How is Israel going to achieve its goal by demilitarizing Hezbollah, pushing them behind the Litani River if they're incapable of, let's say, matching Hezbollah in terms of this urban warfare?
Well, I think they will have a hard time because, as you said, it's not the same terrain as in Gaza, but there is one similarity, and these are the tunnels. These are these military defensive infrastructures that, in fact, the Palestinians in Gaza copied from the Hezbollah. That's the result of the experience of the Israeli invasion of 2006. And at that time, you may remember that the Israelis also attacked with overwhelming air power and bombing and all that, even tanks and things like this, that obviously the Hezbollah doesn't have. But they were defeated anyway, because the Hezbollah is prepared for a very strong defensive combat. They know the terrain, they know where they are. In fact, they have the same advantage as the Palestinians in Gaza. You know, in Gaza, you could have exactly the same kind of reasoning, because IDF is much powerful, has technology, has reconnaissance, has missiles, has everything. But there's one thing they don't have: it's the knowledge of the terrain. And
Mm.
and I would even add that after destroying Gaza, it's even worse, because the geography has changed, and the Palestinians know that geography perfectly well, and they know how to take advantage of that geography, to take advantage of the tunnels. There are so many examples where you see the Palestinians popping up out of the ground, firing at a tank, and then going back into the tunnel and disappearing. And we may have the same kind of situation. And in fact, in 2006, that's already what happened. The difference is between 2006 and today is that in today, the Hezbollah is much more powerful than it used to be. It has much more weaponry, including rocket artillery, that it used to be. It has much more reconnaissance than it used to have. We have seen in the recent months the use of reconnaissance drone all over Israel, up to Tel Aviv, basically, where Hezbollah was able to, let's say, identify possible targets and to publicize them. They could even publicize. And what is also important to note is that Hezbollah was able to fly those drones without being intercepted. And
Yes.
that's something which is noteworthy. In any case, Hezbollah has this capacity today. In addition to that, the Hezbollah has been battle hardened, if you want, because they have been involved in Syria in 2012, 13, and so on, against the ISIS in support of the Syrian army. Therefore, they know how to fight in open terrain. They know how to handle. I mean, also psychologically. Remember that if you look at the psychological impact of the battle on the Palestinians on one side, in Gaza, and the Israeli soldiers. I End of last year have seen a figure. Again, I'm not able to confirm that, but I remember the figure of 25,000 Israeli soldiers who needed psychiatric assistance after
Yes.
being committed to Gaza, meaning that we are talking about uh, an Israeli army which has probably a technological advantage, but I'm not sure it has the mindset and the psychological advantage that Hezbollah has.
Hmm.
And we already saw that in 2006. I could even go back to earlier, but in 2006 that was obvious. So I I cannot say what could be the outcome of, or the final outcome of the an Israeli invasion in Lebanon, but I am not sure they will be able to repel or to push the Hezbollah behind the Litani River. I'm not
Hmm.
sure they will be able to do that.
I really
Just
doubt that.
sorry.
Personally, yeah. I really
Yeah,
doubt that the Israelis would be able to push Hezbollah to the north of Litani River, and even if they do, they can still fire long-range missiles against Israel from the north of Litani River. So it's a for me, someone. I'm not a military guy. I followed the map of control over Syria, and I watched the Hezbollah intervention and the places that they stormed because they were striking force in so many difficult battles that they opened
yeah,
the way, the path in some of the battles for the Syrian army to take control. And they are ideologically also very committed. Um, and I heard countless of stories. And this is something that I don't want to say. This is some army is bad and some army is good, but comparisons between the Syrian army and Hezbollah. For example, Hezbollah are very religiously motivated and committed people, and they haven't, for example, they don't drink, they don't steal, they don't commit certain acts. Like they're just committed into certain action and they withdraw. That's it. That's all what they did in Syria, and they were very efficient. Speaking of Syria, just last question, Colonel, for you. In case of the expansion of the war in the region, do you see Syria would have a direct role in this, taking into account that Americans have occupation forces in the country and the army is overstretched in the country, trying to keep the country in one piece because you still have tens of thousands, let's say at least 20,000 these jihadists in northern Syria?
well, that's a good question. I ask myself exactly the same question, by the way. My feeling, and again, probably you're better placed than me to answer that question, but my feeling is that Syria, for now, tries to solve its domestic problems, and that's the emphasis. At the same time, you have a lot of Shiite militias in Syria and in Iraq who already, by the way, have declared their willingness to join the combat, to join Hezbollah if Israel would start invading southern Lebanon. And there are at least five of those militias who have committed. They have joined the effort and committed themselves to support Hezbollah physically in South Lebanon. So we might have an external support to Hezbollah. Whether it comes from the Syrian army, I'm not sure. I mean, from the Syrian government, but certainly from some militias and local militias which are on the territory, and certainly from Iraq, because
Mm.
there are some. Now, the question is open also to other actors of the conflict. If Israel wants to respond to this current attack with massive blow and something disproportionate as they are used to, that may trigger also some willingness in the region, even though they are not Shiite, but we remember that, and I think that's a very important point, by the way, that a few weeks ago, the Islamic, the conference of the Islamic State, which had, sorry, it's the Arab League, I think. Sorry,
Republic, yeah.
it's the Arab League, who had the Hezbollah listed as terrorist organization at the request of the U.S. They delisted the Hezbollah, meaning
Mm.
that because beyond the symbolic value of that, that means also that now they are entitled to support Hezbollah
Mm.
because it's no longer a terrorist organization. And even though I'm not sure exactly about their willingness to do so, I think that the if Israel responds in a very disproportionate manner, if we add this to what we have seen in Gaza in the last year, that may well prompt other states to have a more active role in this conflict, similar to the Houthis, for instance, something
Yes.
like that. So it's hard to have an estimate today about the exact reaction of all these countries. They might have different mode of actions, probably not militarily, but probably more on the economic side, for instance, to have some kind of blockade against Israel or think like that. That's something we might have from as a regional response to Israel beyond the mere military response that that Hezbollah is providing to Israel and maybe Iran.
Yes, I totally agree. I think Syria at the moment will continue playing the same role of giving the military assistance to Hezbollah, and you have a research center in Syria also developing long-range missiles and sharing the knowledge with Hezbollah, and they can um, build these missiles and these weapons themselves in the factories in southern Lebanon. But if Israel goes too far and into extent of carpet bombing some civilian neighborhoods or strategic assets in Syria, which means bombing certain front lines to allow the jihadists to move inside cities again, then there will be a different talk. But we're not there yet. The bombing of Israel
Exactly.
is what they call surgical strikes. They didn't carpet bomb Syria yet or committed such a big strategic mistake, I would call. Guys, I would just make an announcement quickly. Over 2,300 people watching this live on YouTube, on X, and on Rumble. I have put the link of the books of our dear guest, our colonel, in the description below. There are multiple, actually, books you can purchase on Amazon. The last one is the Operation Al Aqsa Flood, right, Colonel? The defeat of the vanquisher.
Exactly. Yes.
And yeah, yes, and we have the Russian Art of War, how the West led Ukraine to defeat. We have the Navalny case, conspiracy to serve foreign policy. We have Ukraine between war and peace, and we have multiple other books in this link that you can purchase them. Is there any other place, Colonel, that the people can purchase, or do you want them to go on Amazon?
I think probably Amazon is the safest one. I think so. I'm not really aware of where all my books are. So, but
Yeah,
Amazon is certainly one.
I think this is universal, guys. If you go to Amazon, even if you're from Germany or from France or from any other country, it will direct you to your country, so you can buy the book from your country on Amazon. So I put the link already in the description of YouTube. and Rumble. And now once this live streaming and conversation is over, I will also post the link on X under the video so you can all take a look and choose and see which one do you like to read. Colonel, this was a really pleasure to have you for the first time on Syriana Analysis. I really enjoyed it. People were telling me to follow the comments because they were fighting. Of course, some of the people were fighting about the ideas. I wanted to listen to you completely to understand and also learn from you. So I also would like to apologize from the followers who were with thousands who were asking me to moderate the comments, which I preferred to listen to your wisdom and learn about this latest development in the region. So thank you so much for coming to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. It's a really pleasure. Guys, thank you so much again for tuning into today's live streaming. I appreciate you all. If you like to support this work, you can just hit the like button, share this video with your friends. And if you like to support the work I'm doing, the independent work, you can become a patron. The link is scrolling on the screen, patreon.com/Syriana Analysis. And I will see you tomorrow, 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time. Peace be upon you.